The Macedonian Front of World War I, also known as the Salonika Front, was formed as a result of an attempt by the Allied powers to aid Serbia, in the autumn of 1915, against the combined attack of Germany, Austria-Hungary and Bulgaria. The expedition came too late and in insufficient force to prevent the fall of Serbia, and was complicated by the internal political crisis in Greece. Eventually, a stable front was established running from the Albanian Adriatic coast to the Struma River, pitting a multinational Allied force against the Bulgarian army, which was at various times bolstered with smaller units from the remaining Central Powers. The Macedonian Front remained quite stable, despite local actions, until the Great Allied Offensive in September 1918. Which resulted in the capitulation of Bulgaria and the liberation of Serbia. Background: Austria-Hungary had attacked Serbia in August 1914 but had failed to overcome Serbian resistance. After the entry of the Ottoman Empire into the war on the side of the Central Powers, the decisive factor in the Balkans became the attitude of Bulgaria. Bulgaria occupied a strategically important position on the Serbian flank and its intervention on either side of the belligerents would be decisive. Bulgaria and Serbia had fought each other twice in the previous 30 years, in the Serbo-Bulgarian War of 1885 and in the Second Balkan War of 1913. Bulgaria had suffered defeat in 1913 and the Bulgarian government and people generally felt that Serbia had stolen land which rightfully belonged to Bulgaria. While the Allies could only offer Bulgaria small territorial concessions from Serbia and neutral Greece, the Central Powers' promises appeared far more enticing, as they offered to cede most of the land which Bulgaria claimed. With the Allied defeats at the Battle of Gallipoli and the Russian defeat at Garlice-Tarnow demonstrating the Central Powers' strength, King Ferdinand signed a treaty with Germany and on September 21, 1915 Bulgaria began mobilizing for war. Triple invasion and the fall of Serbia. After the victory of the Serbian army in the Battle of Kolubara in December 1914, the Serbian front saw a lull until the early autumn of 1915. Under the command of Field Marshal August von Mackensen, the Austro-Hungarian Balkan Army, the German 11th Army and river flotillas on the Danube and the Sava began an offensive on 6 October 1915, the largest offensive against Serbia. By September 1915, despite the extreme sacrifice of the Serbian army, the Austro-Hungarian Balkan Army, having crossed the rivers Sava and Drina, and the German 11th Army after crossing the Danube, occupied Belgrade, Smederevo, Požarevac and Golubac, creating a wide bridgehead south of the Sava and Danube rivers, and forcing Serbian forces to withdraw to southern Serbia. On 15 October 1915, two Bulgarian armies attacked, overrunning Serbian units, penetrating into the valley of the South Morava River near Vranje up to the 22nd of October 1915. The Bulgarian forces occupied Kumanovo, Stip, and Skopje, and prevented the withdrawal of the Serbian army to the Greek border and Thessaloniki. For a year, the Allies had repeatedly promised to send serious military forces to Serbia, while nothing had materialized. But with Bulgaria's mobilization to its south, the situation for Serbia became desperate. The developments finally forced the French and the British to decide upon sending a small expedition force of 2 divisions to help Serbia, but even these arrived too late in the Greek port of Thessaloniki to have any impact in the operations. The main reason for the delay was the lack of available Allied forces due to the critical situation in the Western Front. The Entente used Greek neutrality as an excuse, although they could have used the Albanian coast for a rapid deployment of reinforcements and equipment during the first 14 months of the war. The Entente also delayed due to protracted secret negotiations aiming at bringing Bulgaria into the Allied camp, which event would have alleviated Serbia's need for Franco-British help. In the event, the lack of Allied support sealed the fate of the Serbian army. Against Serbia, the Central Powers marshaled the Bulgarian army, a German army, and an Austro-Hungarian army, all under the command of Field Marshal Mackensen. The Germans and Austro-Hungarians began their attack on October 7 with a massive artillery barrage, followed by attacks across the rivers. Then, on the 11th, the Bulgarian army attacked from two directions, one from the north of Bulgaria towards Nis, the other from the south towards Skopje. The Bulgarian army rapidly broke through the weaker Serbian forces which tried to block its advance. With the Bulgarian breakthrough, the Serbian position became hopeless. Their main army in the north faced either encirclement and enforced surrender, or retreat. Marshal Pupnik ordered a full Serbian retreat, southwards and westwards through Montenegro and into Albania. The Serbs faced great difficulties. Terrible weather, poor roads and the need for the army to help the tens of thousands of civilians who retreated with them. Only c. 125,000 Serbian soldiers reached the Adriatic coast and embarked on Italian transport ships that carried the army to Corfu and other Greek islands, before it travelled on to Thessaloniki. Marshal Pupnik had to be carried during the whole retreat. He died just over a year later in a French hospital. The French and British divisions marched north from Thessaloniki in October 1915 under the joint command of French General Maurice Sarrail and Irish General Brian Mahon. However, the War Office in London was reluctant to advance too deep into Serbia, so the French divisions advanced on their own up the Vardar River. This advance gave some limited help to the retreating Serbian army, as the Bulgarians had to concentrate larger forces on their southern flank to deal with the threat, which led to the Battle of Krivolac. By the end of November, General Sarrail had to retreat in the face of massive Bulgarian assaults on his positions. During his retreat, the British at Kostromino were also forced to retreat. By December 12, all Allied forces were back in Greece. The Germans ordered the Bulgarians not to cross the Greek borders. Reluctant to risk a Greek entry into the war in response to a Bulgarian invasion in Macedonia, the Allies for their part took advantage of that, reinforcing and consolidating their positions behind the borders. Thus there resulted a clear, albeit incomplete victory for the Central Powers. As a consequence, they opened the railway line from Berlin to Constantinople, allowing Germany to prop up its weaker partner, the Ottoman Empire. Despite the Central Powers' victory, the Allies managed to save a part of the Serbian army, which, although battered, seriously reduced and almost unarmed, escaped total destruction and after reorganizing resumed operations 6 months later. And most damagingly for the Central Powers, the Allies, using the moral excuse of saving the Serbian army, managed to replace the impossible Serbian front with a viable one established in Macedonia, a front which would prove key to their final victory 3 years later. Establishment of the Macedonian Front. On January 5, 1916, the Austro-Hungarian army attacked Serbia's ally Montenegro. The small Montenegrin army offered strong resistance in the Battle of Mokovac, which greatly helped the withdrawal of the Serbian army, but soon faced impossible odds and was compelled to surrender on January 25. The Austro-Hungarians advanced down the coast of the Adriatic Sea into Italian-controlled Albania. By the end of the winter, the small Italian army in Albania had been forced out of nearly the whole country. At this point, with the war in the Balkans almost lost, the British General Staff wanted to withdraw all British troops from Greece. But the French government protested strongly and the troops remained. The Allied armies entrenched around Thessaloniki, which became a huge fortified camp, earning themselves the mocking nickname, the Gardeners of Salonika. The Serbian army, after rest and refit on Corfu, was transported by the French to the Macedonian Front. In the meantime, the political situation in Greece was confused. Officially, Greece was neutral, but King Constantine I was pro-German, while Prime Minister Eleftherios Venizelos was pro-Allied. Venizelos invited the Entente into Thessaloniki, With knowledge that Romania was about to join the Allied side, General Sarail began preparations for an attack on the Bulgarian armies facing his forces. The Germans, with excellent intelligence, made plans of their own for a spoiling attack. The German offensive was launched on August 17, just 3 days before the French offensive was scheduled to start. In reality, this was a Bulgarian offensive, as the Austro-Hungarian army was in Albania and only one German division was on the Greek border. The Bulgarians attacked on 2 fronts. In the east, they easily conquered all Greek territory east of the river Struma, since the Greek army was ordered not to resist by the pro-German King Constantine. In the west, the attack achieved early success thanks to surprise, but the Allied forces held a defensive line after 2 weeks. Having halted the Bulgarian offensive, the Allies staged a counter-attack starting on September 12. The terrain was rough and the Bulgarians were on the defensive, but the Allied forces made steady gains. Slow advances by the Allies continued throughout October and on into November, even as the weather turned very cold and snow fell on the hills. The Germans sent 2 more divisions to help bolster the Bulgarian army, but by November 19 the French and Serbian army captured Kamakshalin, the highest peak of Nidza Mountain, and compelled the Central Powers to abandon Bitola to the Entente. 60,000 Bulgarians and Germans were killed or captured. The front moved about 25 miles. The unopposed Bulgarian advance into Greek-held eastern Macedonia precipitated a crisis in Greece. The royalist government ordered its troops in the area not to resist and to retreat to the port of Kavala for evacuation. But no naval vessels turned up to permit the evacuation to take place. Despite occasional local resistance from a few officers and the nucleus units, most of the troops, along with their commander, surrendered to a token German force and were interned for the remainder of the war at Görlitz, Germany. The surrender of territory recently won with difficulty in the Second Balkan War of 1913 was the last straw for many Venizelist army officers. With Allied assistance, they launched Turku, which secured Thessaloniki and most of Greek Macedonia for Venizelos. From that point Greece had 2 governments. The official, royal government at Athens, which maintained Greek neutrality, and the revolutionary, Venizelist, provisional government of national defense, at Thessaloniki. At the same time, the Italians had deployed more forces to Albania, and these new troops managed to push the Austrian corps back through very hilly country south of Lake Ostrovo. 1917. By spring 1917, General Sarail's Allied Army of the Orient had been reinforced to 24 divisions, 6 French, 6 Serbian, 7 British, 1 Italian, 3 Greek and 2 Russian brigades. An offensive was planned for late April, but the initial attack failed with major losses and the offensive was called off on May 21. The Venizelists and the Entente, wishing to exert more pressure on Athens, occupied Thessaly, which had been evacuated by the Royalists, and the Isthmus of Corinth, dividing the country. After an attempt to occupy Athens by force, that caused the reaction of the local royalist forces and ended in a fiasco in December. The Allies established a naval blockade around southern Greece, which was still loyal to King Constantine, causing extreme hardship to the people in those areas. 6 months later, in June, the Venizelists presented an ultimatum, resulting in the exile of the Greek king and the reunification of the country under Venizelos. 1918. Opposing forces in the middle of September. Central Powers Entente military operations in May. General Guillaumat's Greek troops attacked and captured the strong Bulgarian position of Skrady-Legan, marking the first major Greek action on the Allied side in the war. With the German spring offensive threatening France, Guillaumat was recalled to Paris and replaced by General Franchet Despery. Although Despery urged an attack on the Bulgarian army, the French government refused to allow an offensive unless all the countries agreed. General Guillaumat, no longer needed in France, traveled from London to Rome, trying to win approval for an attack. Finally, in September, agreement was reached and Despery was allowed to launch his grand offensive. The Allied forces were now very large. Despite the Russians being obliged to cease their participation due to the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk in March 1918, not only did the Entente have the Greek army fully on their side, but they also had some 6,000 men from the Czechoslovak Legion, who had been evacuated from Russia and sailed around the world, ready to fight the Austro-Hungarians. The Bulgarians had also increased their army during 1917, and in total manpower, the two sides were roughly equal. The Allies were certain of their impending victory, while the Bulgarians could see the war was lost. The Ottoman Empire was near collapse, the Austro-Hungarian government was in chaos, and the German army was beaten on the decisive Western Front. The Bulgarians were not willing to fight and die for a lost cause. The preparatory artillery bombardment of enemy positions for the Battle of Dobropol began on September 14. The following day, the French and Serbians attacked and captured their objective. On September 18, the Greeks and the British attacked but were stopped with heavy losses by the Bulgarians in the Battle of Duran. The Franco-Serbian army continued advancing vigorously, and next day, some Bulgarian units started surrendering positions without a fight, and the Bulgarian command ordered a retreat. In the official British government history of the Macedonian campaign, Cyril Falls wrote a detailed analysis of the situation of the Bulgarian forces and the situation of the front. Although a breakthrough was achieved at Dobropol and the Allied forces continued their advance, the Bulgarian army was not routed and managed an orderly retreat. By September 29, Skopje fell, but a strong Bulgarian and German force had been ordered to try and retake it the next day. The number of Bulgarian prisoners of war in Allied hands around that day was only 15,000. Another major factor contributed to the Bulgarian request for an armistice. A massive retreating Bulgarian mutineers had converged on the railway center of Radomir in Bulgaria, just 30 miles from the capital city of Sofia. On September 27, leaders of the Bulgarian Agrarian National Union took control of these troops and proclaimed the overthrow of the monarchy in a Bulgarian republic. About 4,000–5,000 rebellious troops threatened Sofia the next day. Under those chaotic circumstances, a Bulgarian delegation arrived in Thessaloniki to ask for an armistice. On September 29, the Bulgarians were granted the Armistice of Thessaloniki by General Despery, ending their war. The Macedonian Front was brought to an end at noon on 30 September 1918, where the ceasefire came into effect. The soldiers' uprising was finally put down by October 2. Tsar Ferdinand I of Bulgaria abdicated and went into exile on October 3. The British army headed east towards the European side of the Ottoman Empire, while the French and Serbian forces continued north and liberated Serbia, Albania and Montenegro. The British army neared Constantinople, and with no serious Ottoman forces to stop it, and the Ottoman government asked for an armistice on October 26. Enver Pasha and his partners had fled several days earlier to Berlin, with desperate Frankie pushing ever forward. The Serbo-French army recaptured Serbia and overran several weak German divisions that tried to block its advance near Nice. On November 3, Austria-Hungary was forced to sign an armistice on the Italian front, and the war there ended. On November 10, Despery's army crossed the Danube River and was poised to enter the heartland of Hungary. At the request of the French general, Count Károly, leading the Hungarian government, came to Belgrade and signed another armistice, the Armistice of Belgrade.